To the cloud. Good evening and welcome to Know Before You Grow, a subcommittee of Petaluma Urban Chat. I'm Dan Like, and as always, thanks to Dave Alden and Sharon Kirk, who do all the heavy lifting. This evening, we're talking about active transportation, but before we get there, a few housekeeping notes. First, we have been Zoom bombed in the past. We will likely be Zoom bombed in the future. If things get weird, just hang on the line and I will let you in shortly, or I will try to get back as soon as we can. If you get booted out accidentally, rejoin, please. And also, I'm enabling the waiting room. And if you know somebody who's having trouble getting in, I will send them a message via the chat. And if they don't respond, I'm not going to let them in. And if they've got weird names, I'm also going to be hesitant about it. So please help people join. Help me help you. We're going to go back to, or go with the format where you send your questions directly to me and I will summarize them later. And we'll drag people in as we go along and play it by ear. But we find that that lets me track the conversation much better, which I am much happier with. Some evening, I should probably talk about what all the Brown Act and Sunshine laws mean. But for now, if you are an elected or an appointed official and feel that you might be engaging in a serial meeting by speaking up, feel free to not speak up. And if you are somebody who is wondering why an elected or appointed official isn't speaking up, that may be why. Use your own judgment there. A few notes on future events. We have coming up the 8th of December, a session on affordable housing. The 15th of December, a discussion about housing and urban growth boundaries. And on the 12th of January, housing in the missing middle. And I think that, and on the 18th of Thursday, or Thursday the 18th, because we're doing a little earlier this year to avoid Thanksgiving, we will be joining at Aquas at noon for an in-person discussion and would love to see any or all of you there. And with that, I'm going to get back to watching all of the messages flying across my screen and turn the meeting over to Dave Alden, who is going to introduce our speakers for this evening. Dave, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dan. Good evening. It's great to see so many people here. I have a couple of quick thoughts to share before making those introductions. 4 years ago, when we first laid out the Urban Chat mission statement in Kevin McDonald's living room, pillar number 2 was transportation options to reduce car dependency. Wordy, but acceptable. The term active transportation wasn't even in our vocabulary. And yet here we are this evening, 4 years later, hosting a forum on exactly that phrase, active transportation. I firmly believe that terms come into common currency just as we need them. The rise of active transportation indicates an increasing awareness of the community changes we need to make, and that's a great thing. Also, although our topics this evening are road diets and woonerfs, we must remember that these are only building blocks toward active transportation systems. Our goal shouldn't be limited to more road diets or woonerfs, but completion of systems that allow us to live without cars. I think particularly about connecting the young to their destinations. How do we allow students at Valley Vista or McDowell Elementaries to reach the public library without needing a parent to drive them? There was only a single year in my youth when I could reach a library without someone driving me. For that year, I could ride my bike through a mile of low-speed residential streets to a small branch library in a hidden corner of a rundown shopping center. It was magical. As a 5th grader, I could explore new ideas. I still recall some of the books I read that year. Our goal must be to provide similar magic to the 5th graders of today, using well-designed road diets, woonerfs, transit routes, or whatever else is needed to get them to the library or wherever they need to be to become the best people possible. We have 3 fine speakers this evening to point us in the right direction. First will be David Parisi, founder of Parisi Transportation Consultants and a professional and traffic engineer with over 30 years of experience in multimodal transportation planning and design. We almost had David as a speaker 3 years ago on the topic of road diets. Unfortunately, his schedule didn't permit, but I'm pleased it worked out this time around. David will give us a broad introduction to active transportation, then using an Alameda road diet as an example. Next up will be Ken Eichstadt, who some of you may remember speaking last month on BMT mitigations. Ken is Petaluma's senior traffic engineer, playing a key role in many of Petaluma's transportation challenges and opportunities. He also tells me that in a prior life, he was an avid bicycle advocate. He'll talk about a Petaluma road diet in the planning stages. Last will be Katahdi Planning Commissioner Neil Hancock. 3 months ago, Neil emailed Pete Gang, Neto, and me looking for Petaluma insights on woonerfs. I didn't know Neil, but was always happy to chat about woonerfs. We've been exchanging emails ever since, with him sharing his transportation observations from both sides of the Atlantic. I'm looking forward to his update on Katahdi's romance with this new approach to complete streets. David, the floor is yours.
Oh my, well, thank you very much. Really happy to be here tonight, everybody. It's also great to see you all, and maybe someday it'll be in person. As Dave mentioned, I do have a lot more years of experience than I even believe sometimes. Been doing this for 35 years. I'm a civil engineer and traffic engineer. I actually live right down the road in Marin County, and we have an office there as well as in Berkeley. And some of the work that I've been doing through the years is I manage the Marin County Safe Routes to School program. And I've also been involved in many complete street renovations, including Miller Avenue in Mill Valley, currently working on Sir Francis Drake in Marin County. And we're currently renovating 14 blocks of Milvia Street in Berkeley, downtown Berkeley, to create a class 4 bikeway in both ways. It's a lot of crashes that have occurred on that roadway. It's under construction, and it's really going to be a wonderful, wonderful project. My passion is in active transportation. I've been doing this, like I said, for 3 decades. Spent quite a bit of time also up in Portland, Oregon, getting to renovate 7 bridges across the Willamette River for bicycles and pedestrians. But it's really fun, and it's very rewarding work. Tonight, I'm going to really kind of focus, and what I've been asked to do is focus on a project we just completed this summer in the city of Alameda called the Otis Drive Traffic Calming and Safety Project. And what I'm going to do is share my screen and kind of walk through some slides that we've worked with the public on and presented to really get input on what some of the existing issues were. Walk through different active transportation tools, the pros and cons, and kind of show you the process that worked for this project. And also at the end, we'll show a video of kind of a before and after, including some drone shots and some fancy music somebody put this to. Well, real quick, let me get this. You guys see the screen I have up right now? This is just Google Earth. Here's Petaluma. Here's where I live. But over here is Otis Drive. And this is in the city of Alameda, which is actually an island. And I'm going to talk to you about this 1.1 mile corridor, what it looked like and what it is now. And let me do that by going right to a presentation. Do you see the slide that says Otis Drive now? Okay, fantastic. So we actually worked very, very closely with the public because there was a lot of naysayers and folks who didn't want any change whatsoever, even though there were some existing issues that were occurring on this roadway. And what I'm doing is actually, I'm just kind of recycling a presentation that the first presentation we gave, because it was really, really effective. Although it took a lot of work right up front. We wanted to communicate with the community about the project's goals. At this workshop, the first workshop, it was in a gymnasium, we had about 100 people in attendance. But we also knew it was very, very important to get community input and really see if we understood what the issues were, because I think the most success we've ever had is where we've really listened and got ownership by a community on a project. So this was really a listening session about what some of the current, or at that time, current traffic and safety issues were, Then we wanted to present just ideas, a toolbox of different kinds of things, and get feedback from folks on what they liked or didn't like, or questions that they may have had. And then we had a breakout session, 5 or 6 groups that were facilitated just to really sketch out issues and ideas. And this process I have found really works well, because it's really important to get feedback and input and buy-in. On this project, which was about a little over a mile long, the goals were to reduce speeds. Speeds were super high on this 4-lane street without turn lanes. And it wasn't just the average speed, or what you sometimes may hear is 85th percentile speed that speed limits are based on, but it was also the outliers. The car that would occasionally come down the road at 72 miles an hour, something like that. So we really wanted to understand that better. There was very few pedestrian crossings across this 64-foot wide street, and some pedestrians have been hit. Actually, one had been killed. So that was a high priority to improve pedestrian safety. And there was no bikeways, no bike lanes, no nothing. But it was near parks and schools. Couple of the AC transit bus routes are along Otis Drive and a couple of other streets. And some of the bus stops were not ADA compliant. They didn't provide areas for lifts, or they were on the near side of an intersection and congestion traffic. But also, we knew and we heard that it'd be important to incorporate green infrastructure onto the street, like if we're doing bulb outs or things like that. What can we do with bioretention or with additional landscaping? And then we stopped and said, are these the right goals? We really wanted to understand from folks if they were on board with this. The project initially was to do come up with a project, see what then could be done with a little bit of money, and then save for the future for a long-term project. We talked about the whole schedule and the whole process, and then we dove into the history of the street. This is a fun slide, because in 1946, Otis Drive did not exist. It was out in the bay. As Alameda started filling in, and you can see it right here, the shoreline was here in the middle photo in 1958. This whole area was developed. And before long, Otis Drive became a 64-foot wide 4-lane street that was developed for the automobile. And just up until last year, it was an auto street. You could actually land a plane on it. It was long and straight, and just had 4 traffic lanes and parking lanes. We always knew it was important to also talk about the things that have been done on the street, just like any of streets in Petaluma. Things evolve over time. Measures can be deployed, things like leading pedestrian intervals, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. When you push a button, the walk light goes up before the green light for traffic. So a pedestrian can establish their right of way in the crosswalk. It's a nice tool where it's appropriate. ADA compliant, some ramps were put in, some protected, what are called protected left turns, so left turn arrow, and other things. But not much, just a bunch of small little things that were done. In the meantime, here's a photo or an image of Otis Drive from kind of west to east, and it intercepts a state park, actually on the west side at Westline Drive. It has zero traffic controls, or had 0 traffic controls or crosswalks all the way down to Grand Avenue, which is a signalized intersection, which is where also the pedestrian fatality occurred. 1 crosswalk at an elementary school, and that was it, folks. That was really it. Pretty straight, pretty good bypass route. And the island is developing slowly but surely. So these were things that were really on people's minds. Also, you can see the bus stops along this street. Here's how the street looked just a couple years ago. Not unlike some roadways in Petaluma and in the North Bay, where was developed, with 4 lanes of traffic and parking. Looks really familiar, doesn't it? And we work on a lot of streets like this, and I almost see these as opportunities, actually, because I don't fret about wide streets. I think it gives you a lot of opportunities to do some things after you go through a good planning process. We also knew it would be very important, even before we jumped into the public outreach, was to do a survey and really understand where people were coming from. So we're a little more armed before, so we didn't get blindsided at a community meeting. And so we really wanted to understand people's input. Some of this presentation, by the way, was developed based on what we knew from that input. And so, for instance, we asked people before the meeting, what was their typical destination? Was it work, home? Was it to a school, to a park? What did you find most challenging? And we ranked those. You know, people thought traffic speeds or just the safety of walking or biking. All down the list. And then just some qualitative narratives from folks. Speeding is a big issue. People drive like it's a freeway. Tough to get across the street. There's this intersection in the middle of the corridor at Grand, just had green light, red light on each approach, had no left turn arrows or turn lanes. And so it was really confusing because it was right in front of a park, in front of a school. And it was kind of desolate street. Some folks wanted more trees and just a better streetscape. You know, the speed limit posted at 25. You can see this sign here that says your speed 34. That was on a good day. There were people who are driving very fast along this street. Like I said, there wasn't really any incentive not to, because the lanes were wide and there really wasn't any calming things in effect. In fact, some people took it into their own court to add signs, you know, slow down, it's my street. This graphic shows you a few things, just speeds at different locations along the street and the average speeds, the 85th percentile speeds, which by the way is usually used as a measurement to figure out what your posted speed limit should be. So in this case, at this place it was 33, 33, and 33, but the highest speeds ever recorded, you know, we would see 46 miles an hour, 75 miles an hour, 47 miles an hour. So to me, in traffic calming, it's not always about lowering the average speed by a couple of miles an hour, which is always a nice thing to do and was the ultimate result of this project, but to also bring down those real outliers, those folks that feel super comfortable going really fast, but get those down, because obviously those are the people that can kill somebody. We knew it was also important to understand the types of collisions that were occurring. So we looked at a 5-year period, we plotted them out. You can see bicyclists and pedestrians were in about 19% of the collisions, but of those who were severely injured or killed, it was 50%. So vulnerable users, you know, we got to be very, very careful, particularly with the speeds that we saw in the long crossing distances. So that's partially what this project was designed for, is those vulnerable users, but also to encourage and provide just a better safety for bicyclists and pedestrians. There you go. So injury fatal by mode is actually it was 54% of the crashes. So it's really important to understand that and who's suffering the most from these types of collisions. This graph I like to use, and there's different variations of it, and that is, you know, your likelihood of getting hurt or killed if you're hit by a vehicle at different speeds. And we know that the faster cars are going, the higher the likelihood that you're going to be killed or severely injured. And particularly once you start hitting the 30 and 40 mile an hour ranges, and even more so now with the types of vehicles that are on the road, with the big trucks, the SUVs, more so than ever before, with passenger cars. There's a lot of folks who didn't want to see any change in the street, including many people who lived along the street. And they felt that if there was any change in the number of lanes, there'd be extra congestion or traffic diverting to other streets. So we did look at traffic volumes on both sides of the corridor and plotted them out in each direction. And on this street, the average traffic volumes varied from the west side about 9,800 to about almost 15,000 on the east side. Road conversions of 4 to 3 lanes typically at about 20,000 vehicles, you can start looking at that. So we were well below that threshold. In other words, we knew that if this was done in a very methodical way, we would possibly be able to take it down from 2 lanes in each direction to 1 in each direction with a 2-way left turn lane. And how we prove that to folks is just overlaying it with some lines that show what the capacity is of a roadway with 1 lane in each direction, shown in red here with red dots, about 1,000 cars per hour per lane, versus roadway with 2 lanes in each direction, which this road had at the time. So you can see this is already well below what would be the threshold typically for doing a so-called road diet, which was a term we're not using a whole lot these days, but we did it during this exercise. We just like to think about reallocating the traffic lanes. Bus stops, as you can see, and these pictures, the buses really didn't have ADA stops. It's hard to tell, but they were also near side, which would be cause more congestion and inconvenience for the drivers when they're entering back into the traffic. Some bus stops had higher ridership than others as well. So those are things we took into account because we wanted to see if it makes sense to relocate and improve relocate some of the bus stops and improve some of their operations. And the AC Transit, the bus provider there, has some goals and objectives that we were working with at the same time. So the next thing we did with the community is we kind of mapped out some traffic calming and safety tools we thought should be discussed and what we heard about from community members. Just a real quick overview of pros and cons of the different types of measures. And we wanted to understand or describe what traffic calming is and what some of the safety objectives were. And we went through some of that. So first off, we obviously talked about the advantages of a 3-lane street instead of a 4-lane street. And you can see the before and after image on the left here. And we relied on data from lots of studies, and there have been a lot of studies done, not only in the Bay Area, but compiled by Transportation Research Board and the Federal Highway Administration in regards to going from 4 to 3 lanes and in terms of accident reduction, speed reduction, the types of collisions that occur, what it means for pedestrians, there's fewer lanes to cross, the opportunities for refuge islands and curb bulbs and things like that, if you reallocate the space, what you could do with that space. In this case, lots of different things that you'll see in a bit, including providing areas for bicyclists. And then we went into what some of the trade-offs are and some of the tools that if we were to think about changing the number of lanes in the street, what we could gain instead. Here's some photos from some different projects we've worked on. We've added buffered bike lanes, for instance. Maybe not class 4, which are protected bike lanes with either vertical or horizontal dividers, but buffered in this case that are more permeable. Here's some photos of some more physically separated bikeways. And we showed these, and you'll see that ultimately we were able to put some of these in where we didn't have a lot of driveways in different forms. Obviously, as I showed you before, the roadway did not have many crosswalks across the street. So we wanted to really talk about that and really understand from the community's viewpoint where those should occur and what they thought the best routes would be. And also we knew there was a lot of intersections that cars parked right up to them and really limited the sight distance. So we call this daylighting, where we put maybe some red curb in or a curb bulb or something about 20 feet back or 20 feet ahead of the crosswalk to really provide better sight lines between a motorist and a pedestrian and vice versa. And we want to get feedback on other things like rapid rectangular flash of beacons, and the opportunity if we put in turn lanes instead of 2 through lanes in each direction, but we actually devoted a center lane for turns, what folks thought about that. And we gave some input on our idea. And this is a community that had not seen a roundabout yet. So we knew there was room. We were not going to propose or even show tools that wouldn't make sense, but we wanted to get people's feedback on roundabouts. There was a lot of skeptics because they hadn't seen them. Many folks thought of the the rotaries they've driven on the East Coast or some of the older ones. So we wanted to describe some of the attributes of modern roundabouts with splitter islands and slower speeds and the reduction in types of collisions that can occur. I'm sure, Ken, you get this question a lot. Why not put up a stop sign? And this is a case where, we've heard it too on this street. Just put a whole bunch of stop signs up and down the street. And as a traffic engineer, in the studies I've seen, we know that stop signs don't really slow down speeds along a long corridor because people just make up for lost time. But they're usually, and they really should just be used for right-of-way, assigning right-of-way at intersections. So we just needed to get that out there and answer those questions and really get some feedback from folks. And then we wanted to understand from people's perspective how important parking was to them. We knew we had a super wide street, we could retain parking, but we also realized parking could be removed. It might be beneficial to open up those sight lines, or if we wanted to shift some parking into the street a little bit to provide a parking protected bikeway. And we wanted to really understand from the community's perspective the importance of parking. We also talked, and again, I went through it really like this fast with the community because when we did the breakout groups, we went into more of the detail with additional experts. But we presented the opportunities. If you take out, if you go 3 lanes, you could use that as center area for refuge areas for pedestrians to enable people to cross the street in 2 stages, which, by the way, provide you like you have 5 times more gaps when you're crossing the street in 2 stages than in 1, just because of how the traffic flows work. You can cross one direction at a time, seek refuge, and then cross the other, which is great. Bulb outs, again, a lot of these tools have been used in Petaluma, and I love coming through Petaluma through the years because it's been very progressive in certain areas where the projects have been built. And then we wanted to introduce what's called kind of quick build kind of projects, because we knew that the first phase of this project may not be spending millions of dollars on concrete and drainage and other types of improvements, but actually what can we do lower cost? We do some colorized curb bulbs. And I'm going to show you some in a bit that are proving very successful and were low cost to implement and actually look pretty good. But here's some samples from some other locations that we wanted to show the public and get feedback on. And of course, gateway treatments can take all forms, and what they are is just again a treatment to announce you're entering a neighborhood or a pedestrian zone or a school area. So treat this area with respect. This street had really poor accommodations at the bus stops, lack of benches and shelters and trash cans. And then we just said, hey, okay, whoa, that was a lot of stuff, and there's a lot more things out there. So we want to hear from folks. But again, tell us your input, and we'll describe more of the pros and cons working with you. So that's what we did. That was kind of a first workshop, and I think it's really important to kind of again bring the community involved, get the community involved, and explain things, but also just be open to listening to different ideas. And what we did then was broke the group out into groups. And actually, I think each group spent about 30 minutes with a big map of the corridor, talking about issues and people, in some groups, they just wanted to talk about their concerns, and other folks got really into it and came up with some ideas and presented what their feedback was back to the group. What I'm going to do next is take you through where we ended up next, and then I'm going to show you a video of what actually ended up going on with the project. We came back a few months later and recapped some of the things that you're seeing, some of the things we discussed in the first group. And then here's some of those breakout sessions where folks were actually very constructive, providing feedback, giving us an earful in some cases, other places just being, just being real about what some of the conditions and issues were. It's always nice to have the police there too, to support the fact that, yeah, they're seeing these big speeds and collisions on the street. We took another poll. What were the biggest issues affecting this street? And again, a lot of it had to do with speeding, lack of pedestrian and bike facilities and safety, and then a whole bunch of other stuff as shown on this graph. And what should be implemented? We wanted to hear from folks, and lo and behold, the majority said, let's get that center left turn lane in, because not only can it help introduce other aspects, but even for folks living on the street, they won't have to take a left turn from a through lane and go into their driveway or out of their driveway. Maybe that could be safer to provide access. Bike lanes, landscaping, curbs. And so we got some really good ideas, ranked them out, and started sketching out ideas with all the information we had. You remember, and again, this was several months later, we had some new participants in the audience, so we just wanted to recap some of the same things we had heard about before. And then at the same time, we came back with a sketch. Actually, it was more than a sketch. It's a plan that showed our idea for the street. And I'd say, when I say our, I meant the whole community. And so we went through every single location, what the existing conditions were and what we were proposing in this case. In this case, it was narrowing the street. It was 64 feet wide with 4 12-foot traffic lanes in existing conditions. We were able to divide it up, retain parking, provide a bike lane that's buffered from traffic, provide a narrower traffic lane in each direction of about 10.5 feet and an 11-foot center turn lane. That was our proposal. So we wanted to get feedback, and to really demonstrate what this would look like to folks, we did just a really simple rendering of a before versus an after of what it could look like. So I'll toggle that back and forth. This was super helpful to explain to folks, hey, look, there's your house, there's the parking would be retained, there's a little bit of a buffer, oh, and what about street trees? We heard about that because it's really barren. Here's some opportunities, right, to over time add some landscaping, possibly develop a canopy on this street and make it more of a welcoming roadway. And then what we did with the community is we went through some of the key hotspots to talk about existing versus proposed ideas. This is from west to east, for instance. Here we're showing a bike boxes. I don't know if there's some in Petaluma yet. Are there? You guys know? Not yet. Okay, so a bike box is a tool that allows a bicycle on a red light to get out ahead of the traffic and establish their position. So when the light turns green, they can go first with less potential for conflict. And you can see we proposed a couple bike boxes, which were later implemented on this street. It's important for bike boxes, by the way, to have a bike lane that feeds them. So that's pretty important. So that's something that was shown here, as well as some bus stop relocations. We actually looked at short-term and then long-term ideas. We knew in the short term there just was not enough funding available to put in concrete curb extensions to narrow the street and the crossings, but maybe in the short term there's some ideas of how to do that with some paint. We had a lot of streets like this, which were very popular pedestrian crossings, or maybe a mailbox there, but nobody felt confident crossing the street because 64 feet, no markings. So here's a location where our proposal was to, with the 4 to 3 lane conversion, provide some painted and bollard bulb outs. I'll show you actually how those ended up looking. We're pretty happy with those, but also high visibility crosswalks with rectangular flashing beacons. in this case. And again, super important to understand, is that the right side of the crosswalk from the community? I mean, right side of the street to cross, those kinds of things. And then long-term, what this can convert to if it's successful and there's more money in the future. And, providing curb bulbs, which I love curb bulbs because they make the pedestrian crossing shorter, provide better sight lines between pedestrians and oncoming motorists, and slow down turns. So they serve a lot of purposes, but providing them in concrete and moving them out can be very, very expensive, sometimes $50,000 or more, just because of drainage issues. And you may not know that Alameda is a very flat land-filled island, so drainage is very difficult. So this would be something that could be expensive, but so we wanted to test it out with kind of quick build remedies first. This is probably the center of the project. This is a signalized intersection, Otis and Grand, and it just had, like I said, no left turn lanes or anything. Lots of collisions occurring here, right next to a school, right next to a park, and voila, here's a short-term remedy, which was to just do some quick build balls, but also at this point now providing left turn lanes on all four approaches, which didn't exist before. So people, there may be somebody holding up a through vehicle turning while the person's turning left. Lots of crashes that were occurring here. And it's interesting, our project got expanded now and then onto Grand Street, and we ended up designing Grand in each direction as well to tie everything together. But here was the initial short-term idea that we wanted to get feedback from, and we ran traffic operations. And you'll see a couple other things here, talking about active transportation, the buffered bike lane, and then potentially an opportunity to go through on a green light, to put your bike here, stop, and then when the light turns green for Grand, they come across. These are actually termed Copenhagen lefts for bicycles, and they're often on the far side of an intersection, and pretty neat. We also looked, like bulb out for long term, and then we introduced the idea of a roundabout, and this would be like the minimal acceptable size, and we knew that, but we wanted to talk about would this work. And it's really interesting because they have a big July 4th float parade in this town, and we needed to test it out against any type of their longest float that could get through here. You would think it was Pasadena or something, but we had to actually test it against types of vehicles that could actually get through to make sure if this was built, could they still have their July 4th parade. So there's a park. There was an opportunity, it's hard to see in this image, but I'll show you in the video momentarily because it did get approved, to provide floating parking. This is the park right here. And it's actually a parking protected bikeway. So the parking would be a bit out in the street with a buffer behind the passenger side of the vehicle, and then a bikeway by the curb. And so that the parking itself is acting as a deterrent or a protection for the bikeway. And that's something we wanted to get some feedback on from folks. And I'll just kind of skip through some of this stuff. So again, we went through all these ideas we had, but it actually was the community that provided the feedback, and we tested them with the community. So with that, I kind of want to show you the final product. And Dan, I don't know if you can queue up that video. If I stop sharing, then we can open up to questions.
Let me give this a whirl here.
thanks. That last photo was of the mayor celebrating the project. And I forgot to mention that intersection in the middle, which started out as this typical intersection, and the idea was to do a roundabout in the long term, turned out to be what's called a protected intersection. Something that we decided that might make a lot of sense, and we went talked to the community about it. And what a protected intersection is an intersection that really provides much better protection for cyclists. You can kind of ride around it through those green bikeways. There was enough room to do it. There was the investment that was made in these little biscuits on each of the four corners. And it's turned out to be a really big success there. As a matter of fact, I predict that the roundabout will probably never occur, and at probably 5% of the cost, the protected intersection will probably stay because it's performing very well. I'm going to share my screen one more time and show you a few other things that may be helpful in the future. If you do want to learn more about this project, the City of Alameda has a web page for it. So you just have to Google Otis Drive, City of Alameda. It has some additional information on some of these tools that I think are pretty helpful. It talks about, for instance, road diets and some of the bullets I discussed before, some of the resources for the Federal Highway Administration. And then we knew before any of this was deployed, we needed to get out ahead and describe, right before construction, remind people what was going to happen and what some of these different elements were. So for instance, a protected intersection that I was describing, what is it? What are the benefits? What's it look like? So we did a diagram, really described what it is, how it works, what to expect. Also the diagrams, again, just out front of the project before and while it was under construction, so people knew what was coming, and to remind them what the benefits were of these different treatments. You saw this earlier in the video. These are painted curb bulbs, but we use a special treatment called Street Bond, which lasts a long time and looks good. I think that'll mean we can just retain these painted balls for much longer than we would have thought. Keep an eye on them, and if money comes around to do curb extensions with concrete at some time, install those as well. And then finally, bike boxes, more about bike boxes, how they work, and tools, and so on. And then we also wanted to recap with the roundabout, but this was put up just as a reminder, and also just as what the folks had accepted and how to behave, and what the pros and what the benefits of these things are. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, head on out there, take a look at the street. We just are right now performing some after studies, and we are seeing the speeds have reduced by about 3 miles an hour on the street. We are seeing increased usage by pedestrians and cyclists through that protected intersection. And we're collecting other data as well in regards to traffic volumes. We've not seen any diversion. For instance, the traffic numbers have stayed about the same. So happy to answer any questions you may have.
So we have a couple of questions, but they might actually tie into things that Ken was going to talk about as well, but let's just toss a few of them out there. First is kind of more of a procedural one. That is, how does a street end up with a legal speed limit of 25 miles an hour and a 80th percentile of 33% or whatever it was? I know that the street adjoining mine was pushed up to 30 because the speeds on it were high enough that there was some legal issue about enforcing the 25 mile an hour speed limit. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. We do a lot of engineering traffic surveys for communities. First off, typically if you have a street that has 13 contiguous homes in a quarter mile to it, it's called a residential prima facie street. So it could based on California regulations, it should be signed 25 miles an hour. But if your 85th percentile speed, the speed at which 85% of the people drive at, or below is substantially higher, you can often justify increasing the posted speed limit. So that's typical. You'll see that in cases where even though you have a residential district, the posted speed limit may say 30 or 35, right? In this case, I think it should have been, technically by law, it should have been posted at a higher speed. I think the city just never got around to cranking it up. But now that we're seeing the speeds being lower after the study, we're going to be able to come through and do an engineering traffic survey and most likely justify the posted 25-mile-an-hour speed that it should be. That helps.
Cool. Couple questions about like the decision-making process between the bike lane outboard of the parking versus on the sidewalk side of the parking. How do you make that decision, or the cost considerations?
Well, the cost was no different because it was all done with paint and plastic bollards. But the decision itself, in all the places where there was residential driveways, it turned out we kept the buffered, it was a buffered parking, bikeway, right? But there along that park, there was the opportunity where there was no driveways whatsoever. It was a continuous curb to provide the parking protected bikeway.
Okay, so the difference was driveways versus not.
Pretty much in that case, but also just how it segued and tied into that protected intersection. That was important because it was a four-legged intersection with bikeways on each approach and departure. And it turned out that if you looked very closely, you would have seen that 3 of the 8 bikeway connections were protected or parking protected at that intersection, and 5 were buffer protected. So, but if you're able to do it, it's really important how you tie it into intersections. And that has to do with anything. And I should really state that, particularly for road diets, it typically is not the segments of the street between controlled intersections that matter. It's the intersections that are going to control. And so at Otis and Grand, for instance, that was, and at Otis and Westline, those were the controlling points. So that's super important to make sure those will work from a traffic operations and safety standpoint when you're considering road diet.
Okay. Couple of questions on how the process went. How many people came to the breakout sessions? Were the 260 survey results representative? Yeah,
that's a great question. We were hired as the consultants, and we had heard that there was some contention about doing anything on this street. We carefully plotted out the first community workshop, and I've just learned through the years to it's really important to listen and take the feedback and let the community own the project and let folks just really talk about their issues, their concerns. And we had over 100 people at the first workshop. It was it was uncomfortable at certain times, to be honest, with some of the folks who didn't want any change whatsoever. But the important thing was to listen to them and really see what was the issue to them. What was their concern? Was it about traffic congestion or just overall change? But often you're not going to hear about from the folks who really do want to see some positive change. So it's important. Those breakout groups were really even more of an eye opener to me. We had 6 or so breakout groups the first open house. Most of the people stayed around. And I think like I said, we had over 100 people. In the second open house, we also had over 100 people. And that was very, very important, again, to get the feedback, pros and cons, and also have the electeds there so they can hear the feedback.
And were the concerns that came out in the survey, did they kind of match what you saw in the in-person meetings, or was there a disconnect there?
I'd say that for the most part they were, but again, often in the meetings, I don't know, I'd say that the minority of the folks in these meetings were very vocal, and that's what you heard. But if you sat down at the tables or you did the surveys, that's when you're getting probably a more even, even response.
Okay. A few questions about the protected intersection. One is post. Can you describe how the bicycles move and how that works? And the other is pre. Why was there a fatality at the signalized, which should be allegedly safe intersection?
So I don't have a diagram of the protected. I don't know if we can pull that maybe up, the video back up and scroll it to that location. Dan, that'd be great.
You got a time on that, maybe?
No, we can just scroll through it, but real quick, the fatality occurred with the vehicle turning left through the intersection, because again, it did not have controlled left turns. It didn't have protected left turns. And this is a big cause of pedestrian injuries at signalized intersections, is left or right hooks. And left hooks occur when a vehicle is turning left and hits a pedestrian. Now, usually that should not occur, of course, if there's a left turn arrow, right? Because those movements would never occur at the same time. But the fatality that did occur, a vehicle was turning left on a green ball or green light, and the pedestrian was crossing to with the walk signal. And that's what occurred at that point.
Okay.
If you go, you're almost there. Okay. If you just go a little bit to the right, a little bit to the right, right there. How's that? Oh, it's a little fuzzy. Right there. Stop.
There we go. Yes. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm not sure if I can annotate, but
I think you can.
yes, I can. I definitely can annotate. Awesome.
Woohoo!
Okay. All right. Thank you. So right here, I'm going to start over here. There's a bike lane coming in. As you can see, it actually swerves over against the curb. The bicyclists, there's some yield line, shark's teeth here. They're supposed to yield to any pedestrians crossing the street. But if this cyclist wants to go right, they can go right. If they want to go straight and light's red, they stop right here, right? If they want to go straight, you continue this way. But if you want to make a left turn, you don't have to enter traffic. What you do is you just go here, stop when that light's red, right? And then you come across and go on your journey. So you never have to enter the intersection as a cyclist. You just stay to the right. Vehicles that are turning right, we designed it so that they have to make a tighter turn. Hopefully not that tight because it's drove over the curb, but that was just my drawing error. But the intent is that there's no more fast right turns. If the car is turning right and they see a bike there, they can stop right here without impeding traffic behind them. So protected intersections is important to have that space for a car, right there. So they're turning to the right. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. There's a whole bunch of literature. You can see there's some YouTube videos of protected intersections. This one, the secret for us here was the design of these, what we call biscuits over here. These are raised. This thing here is raised. And then this concrete apron is also raised in the middle. It goes up and goes down. So if you're a vehicle that needs to cross it, like a larger vehicle, you're going to feel it. You're going to go up and go down, but mostly we want the cars going where this one I drew in blue is. But the larger vehicles will go up and down the apron. They'll feel it, and it'll help slow down their maneuver.
And
I was just going to add, you can see that there are 12 islands here. There's 1, 2, 3 times 4. So there was construction costs associated with this. This was the highest cost feature of the street, but substantially lower cost than a modern roundabout would have been.
I'm still sharing the screen here, so I have to get back to my notes. But how much, what did all of this cost?
I'd have to look back, but I think it was under $1 million for the.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, for the entire
Yeah.
design and restriping and whatever curbs you need to put in.
Right. I'll note that, you know, the roadway's pavement was in pretty good shape, so there was no pavement work that was needed to be done. That's important to note. And for the most part, it was done with striping, special paving treatments. And then the intersection that I showed you, plus some bus stop enhancements, were most of the infrastructure.
Cool. And I think I know the answer to this because because the sort of thing I do for entertainment is reading design guides, but, and I was doing this for prep, but what buffers do you have for the various different bike lanes? What does the geometry of that look like?
So that's often going to be, you know, for the buffer bike lanes, it's a negotiation between how wide you want the bike lanes versus the buffer and the traffic lanes, and also the width of the total width of the street. In this case, I believe we went to 2.5 foot buffer for the most part. And then when we had the parking protected, we wanted our buffer out between the cars and the bike lane to be a little wider, so that pedestrians could walk down that buffer if they got out of their car. So that's like 4 feet.
Okay.
Again, there are ideal dimensions for all of these things, but it often comes down to how much room do you have to deal with?
Right. Cool. And before we get on to the next next section here, the one more question here, which my brain just went kablooey on. Let's see. Oh, let's go on, and Ken, and I'm sure this question will wrap back around. Oh, that was it. Why no center street trees? And I think the answer to that is because you had a turn lane down the middle, because you don't really have room for islands with the turn lane.
Right. We did put one or two. There's one big island that we put in there, Refuge Island, down near the school with an RFB. So, but it was decided not to put a tree in there. They also have some issues with the types of trees. The water table on Alameda is challenging, and the types of trees, but we have reserved for future phases more street trees next to the sidewalk.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay. I got a quick question, Dan, for David. What was the ADT on Otis?
I think the top was what, 12,000. Does people remember?
Oh,
I just give the presentation.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. It
Put
was
you on the spot.
well below what, you know, a road diet you can start considering road diet for.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, but as I mentioned before, often it's the intersections, right? So that can control that.
Yeah. Do you want me to head off here, Dan? I'm not going to have you show that video. I don't think there's time, and I'd like to, you know, allow people to ask questions. So I was going to spare you that.
Take it away.
Okay. All right. I don't want. I mean, you seem like you're doing an amazing job there, so I don't want to. Okay. Well, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Ken Eichstadt, senior traffic engineer with the city of Petaluma, and I really want to thank you know, Dave Alden, Dan, Sharon for putting this together, and everybody involved with Know Before You Grow, because it's really important to get this information out there and, you know, solicit feedback, and you know, I'm very appreciative of David giving his time, because there's a wealth of knowledge that he has. Dave and I kind of go way back in Marin, probably 20 years or so. I grew up in Larkspur, Corte Madera, and my dad worked on the Richmond-Santa Fe Bridge, and then he actually worked for J.H. Pomeroy and did the Webster Street Tube over at Alameda. And you know, I've been fortunate to do more on the sort of active transportation element, as we call it now, more from an advocacy standpoint. But I was, you know, walking to school when I was 5 and a half, and biking when I was 7, and that's just kind of what we did. And for 26 years, I rode into San Francisco from Marin, and just felt it super valuable. And Petaluma can be that place. Petaluma has that ability. We've got some really good infrastructure that we just need to kind of polish up and things that we need to do. So it's exciting for me. I've presented at APWA, Pro Walk, Pro Bike, League of American Bicyclists back in Washington. So I've done a fair amount of this, more from an advocacy. And 20 years ago, I did a presentation called Designing from the Outside In. That's kind of what we're doing. We're like, okay, let's make it more comfortable for pedestrians to walk. Let's make sure there's a bike lane, and then let's narrow the vehicular traffic lane to try to slow traffic. And I'll say the one thing that, the overriding principle that goes into, this work of reconfiguring our roadways, it's safety. So I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I'm gonna try to keep it to 5 minutes, Dan. But yank me off if I'm. I think I'm taking too long.
We are imposing on your time. And
No. Well, I do have a big bowl of stew sitting to my right, but I'm not going to share that. So, the over a roughly 3.5 year period. Actually, I'm going to back up here. So we're going to talk about Rainier. I'm going to show you a picture here. Rainier, what we're looking at is North McDowell up to Sonoma Mountain Parkway. And then we got a stop controlled intersection at Maria Drive. We've got 3 schools in the area. There's Bond Park, and there's also the access to the Lynch Creek Trail here off of Maria. So schools, parks right in the area. If we go in and we look at the safety issues, starting with crashes, there's been 9 crashes just over a 3-year period. 5 of those had injuries, and there was 1 pedestrian. So I've gotten a lot of public comment. Somebody said, well, what's the problem? I think, well, that's too many crashes. If we are active, City of Petaluma is active with Vision Zero, I don't think we want that. So I looked at the 85th percentile speed, and that is interesting because it's posted at 35. I think that's too fast. But the 85th percentile, so 85% of the traffic is going at 40 miles an hour or less. That's a lot. That is a whole lot on a neighborhood street. So, is that what we want? Is that what we want for our neighborhoods? I think we need to ask that question. So that's kind of, a little bit of the background on the safety. I should also mention the roadway width varies from roughly just over 50 feet to 64 feet from McDowell, the narrowest, going up to Sonoma Mountain Parkway, the widest. So let's talk about pedestrian safety. David had some excellent examples, and I've been very fortunate to be able to have him involved in some, key city projects. And what we're doing here is looking at Maria Drive and Rainier. It's the picture here on the right. And some of the things that David has talked about are in this. There was a mention of Gateway, and I've got this focus of gateways into Petaluma, I Street, Bodega, D Street. The gateways going from rural roads, basically rural highways, into neighborhoods. What is that? What are we trying to convey? Well, starting with safety, pedestrians may be out there. Speeds are slower. Changed conditions, So I think developing that context is really important on all the roadways that come into Petaluma. We want to make, people aware that, motorists aware that this is a town. It's more congested than the rural highway. So we do that. We can tighten the curb radii. So we've got roughly, existing is going to be 50 feet or more curb radii. So that's the turning movement going, say you're going eastbound on Rainier, turning onto Maria. If you've got, basically it's kind of like a highway on ramp. You haven't really slowed down. You haven't, gotten really good sight lines of what's going on. What we're doing here is tightening the curb radii to 20, feet or less. And just to bring a little bit of awareness, we're bringing the pedestrian out further into the roadway, in the bollard area coming off the existing curb. They're going to be more visible. They're going to have a shorter crossing distance. The motorists won't have to wait as long because they'll actually get a little bit of a head start on this. So this is a really good thing. Looking at looking at the bicyclist, this is a draft example, but I think it's somewhat representative. I should mention that Rainier has parking on the south side. We're going to talk about Rainier going east to west, Sonoma Mountain Parkway to McDowell. And the south side does have parking and the north side has parking, but the south side really doesn't need it. I've spent a lot of time with the public. I've talked to the property managers at Park Place. There's things that we can do there. But this is one example, one alternative where you can get, buffered bike lanes in there and still keep the parking on the north side. So, David's had some really good ideas on this year. So that's a little bit about what's going on in Rainier. Right now, the process is we're going to have a public meeting. I'm pushing to have that in the next month or so, and we'll see. We'll see what people want and where the interest is. But I think we have a lot. We have a lot of opportunities here if we're interested in climate action and Vision Zero. Maybe we need to kind of rethink things. So that I think is a little bit over my 5 minutes there, but I'll leave it there then. Thank you. And I can give an update on other projects if there's time. So thank you, Dan.
Cool. Yeah, I got a couple questions for you on this, and I think that let's start with somebody asking how the passage of AB 43 might be implemented here.
Yes, I was hoping David. I didn't want to interrupt David with that, but I think we're still kind of discovering it. That's hugely exciting, and I think it presents a lot of possibilities. And I'll just say this: I've got another location that I'm looking at, trying to do a mini roundabout, and I looked at the 85th percentile speed. It's a 25-mile-an-hour roadway. The 85th percentile speed is 26, and we can't really do anything with it. But the residents are really concerned about the speeding. And the interesting thing is the outlier, as David correctly mentioned here, I got an outlier of 63 miles an hour. So I think that SB 43 gives us an opportunity to kind of rethink how we're like, if we have to raise the speed limit 5 miles an hour to get radar enforcement, which isn't likely, we're going to keep raising it 5 miles an hour. People just keep going faster. It's not a positive way of moving things. And then I'll just say on this particular roadway, even though the 85th percentile was 26 miles an hour, 15% of the traffic count you could give them a ticket. You could give them a ticket 15%. So the outliers are a concern. Thank you.
Hey, I could jump in real quick on this AB 43, Dan. We've been following it. It's an assembly bill that is going to allow us to reduce speed limits a bit. under certain circumstances. We will not be able to do it though until 2024 because how long it's going to take things to get adopted. But jurisdictions also will have the opportunity, and now is the time to start planning, where you can designate 20% of your roadways as kind of safety roads, where that can definitely, so that talking about Vision Zero and where collisions occur, super important to start thinking about that, because these are, you can up to 20% of your inventory of your streets, you'll be able to apply a safety factor to for reducing speeds.
And of course, as various people in the chat are mentioning to me, because I'm the only one who can read the chat, legal enforcement only goes so far. It's much better what we can do with design. And another one for Ken, when will SMART construct the path from McDowell to Corona to Pengrove?
Excellent question. So we've got most of the environmental items addressed on that. We're going through the GO 88, which is the crossings, and that is being resolved currently. They're looking at construction summer of next year, and that's was given to me by Bill Gamlin about 3 days ago. Thank you.
Cool. Trying to make sure I've got everybody else covered here. And of course, we had that email exchange with Bernie leading up to this. And I sent back the what I found from design guides. But can you talk a little bit about I realize that you're pretty early in the design process here, but maybe what you think the buffer sizes for the bike lanes are going to be, and the decision process between, just as we asked David, inbound and outbound of parking for where the bike lane goes.
Yeah, I'm going to start, and then I'm hoping David may add to this. But we're looking at the buffers that we're looking at is 5 feet, and we're widening the bike lane to 6.5 feet. And this is still in design. We're still evaluating it. And I will just say one thing. The buffered bike lane, there's different cyclists. I tend to be more of a vehicular cyclist. I'm probably going to be out, in the roadway, just because that's kind of where I feel most comfortable. Typically, it depends on the condition. But right now we're widening the bike lane. There's going to be a buffer. We're going to daylight the curb returns, the driveway entrances, so that the sight lines will remain. So, David, if you have anything to add, chime in.
I don't have a whole lot to add. I think there's still work to be done to get the balance right, but I think it's going to be important to have the vehicular lanes at a width that promotes slower speeds. So I think that's as key as anything.
And I have a few more, but somebody else, Sharon, reminds me that we have a third speaker and we should not cut too much into their time. So Neil, you want to pipe up, or Dave, you want to introduce Neil?
I think I've already introduced him. He can take it off as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. And
yes, hello. And does that work? Okay, good. So yes, Dave kind of put it nicely right at the beginning, where we started talking and there was this idea of a woonerf romance. So I live in Katahdi, but really a lot of cycling goes to Petaluma or Petaluma direction. I started off with a job in North McDowell 20 years ago, and actually bought a house in Katahdi where I could cycle the back roads to it. And then more recently, I've had a job in South McDowell area, the business park down there, and ended up cycling and enjoying Maria Drive and being able to go down Maria Drive and get into South McDowell, a very nice cycling, but had to get up Eli Hill and along Eli and that narrow section there. So I got an electric bike to do that. So that's worked out. what's happened more recently is that there's a, as part of a multifamily objective design standard in Katahdi, there was an idea of a woonerf introduced. And now this is a Dutch concept. It's kind of a hard word. I probably got it wrong to talk about, but the fundamental side of it is to be able to have a friendly street. So let me try and start my presentation or a few slides here and see if this works. So can you, yeah, I think you still, can you actually see the slides now? Okay, yes, you can.
Yes, we can.
So there's this living street concept that's coming out of Holland, but I think we all need to try and adapt it to what we think locally, and really what is our owning of it? What is this? We all like the idea, we've all got concepts of this around, so I want to show you a little bit of that. So there's the basic sort of idea, and this came out of Arcata. Arcata is looking at its central plaza and saying, can we actually have this woonerven concept? So visible entrances, which are clearly marked by a sign, a shared paved space intended for all street users. And I'm really trying to say, well, how do we make that paved space also more of a green space that can infiltrate water? Physical barriers such as curves to calm the traffic. So this idea that basically the vehicle's going to have to move slowly, it's not got a line of sight, it's more of a space for people. And as part of that, also landscaping and street furniture. So the first part is a sort of idea of something that says, hey, you're entering a space and there's other activity in there. Katahdi came up with, or some of them mention it's working through Katahdi, it's not part of the code, it's still in process, but it came up that speed limit of 8 miles an hour was something that was more useful than 5 or 10, and that came out of the co-housing sort of thing. Folks on co-housing has done some ideas of, you know, what's safe inside their parking area. There's this complex part that the city council said, okay, let's consider it as part of driveways. And that's where it's working its way through. I don't know whether this is a good place for it, but I just want to talk about the principles and some of the disadvantages of driveways, but where it could actually also work in there. And you can see from this line, basically this idea that a vehicle is going to have to move and meander really as it goes through. That there's either trees or some parallel parking spaces, parallel because there's not so much hidden space behind the car. It won't move out into the road. There can't perhaps be children as easily behind it. There's also street furniture. So that's the idea of the core concept, I think, of a woonerf. And now we're starting to get into a lot of the challenges that really are the way we look at it. So for active transportation, we may end up having more asphalt and blacktop. I mean, this is what's happened just time and time again is that as things get specified, it's wider areas, more asphalt. I think personally, you know, if you had a concrete grid with grass going through it for low speed private places, it probably would work good. I have a driveway, a small driveway on a private house that is crushed gravel, and it's worked very well. That's the way it was when I bought the house. So for private roads, which is where Katahdi is initially talking about it, it turns out when you go through it, well, you've got the parking where the vehicles actually park. Then you've got the parking access, you know, how does a vehicle turn into that? And then optionally, there's the driveways that get from the street into the parking access. And that is where perhaps the concept breaks down a lot, is that there's not a lot of driveway. Now, I know Dave Alden told me that there's some places in Petaluma that he thinks has got some woonerven concepts, but this is a street I've written down a lot, and I suddenly thought, wow, this looks like that as a public street. It's got a lot of these slow features, probably by accident, you know, maybe site design constraints, but it's got this it's got this meander on the street. It actually joins up with a class 1 bike path that is along the Laguna. right now. It has an older type of low-income building that's down here with vehicles coming in, very efficient sort of process, more places over here, later, but less efficient access. It has this necking because of the bridge that's on there, and it actually feels pretty easy to move on it, and it's not that constrained as a street. So East Katahdi Avenue, a major arterial road. So that's as a street, it's what's already there. This is just a little bit away, and it's two buildings that actually, it's a Luther Burbank housing complex and another low-income housing complex with very tight access through a minor driveway that's over here, almost non-existent. And so Katahdi's current concept would outdate these type of things, make them non-conforming, and I think that's a bad idea. But they really work. So here's a bicycle tour. There's my bicycle coming into it. It really works as access, and there's 16.5 feet from fence to walls to be able to get things through it. A little bit further down in Katahdi, there's a Katahdi lane is what this is called. And again, it has some of these concepts, but what would it be like if there was a bit more of a meander around here and less of a straight line to go through? Here's something further down the road more towards the train station, which definitely could benefit, from a concept of some curves or some street furniture in there across the acres of asphalt that is East Katahdi Avenue, which is 2 lanes in each direction. So that's the sort of the basis. Just I want to flesh out some ideas. I think what's in process in Katahdi, I'm certainly trying to still work with what's being proposed and see if it can't be pruned more. There was something in the code when it came to the Planning Commission about doing something for frustrated drivers, and sort of got that removed, because I think part of this is to make the drivers cautious when they move into somewhere. You want them to be able to both appreciate the surroundings and move cautiously. So I'm going to take my my screen share off if I can. There we go. We stopped sharing. But that's just a little introduction to woonerfs, and it's much deeper than what I've actually said. There's a lot more potential, I think, in smaller streets for it to happen rather than driveways. But right now, Katahdi is discussing it and is going back to the council as a driveway. Initially, Katahdi's council, I think, was quite excited about the concept. And so they said, well, we really should mandate it. And maybe that's not such a good idea to put mandates in. How can we give more, and this is where I started the discussion, what would it look like to actually say there could be design elements, perhaps like the green building code, that there's these options for being able to do things for new buildings and for when you're redoing a street in some way. But we have a lot of discussion in certain areas about not wanting too much street calming. And of course, historically, there was a plebiscite in Katahdi where the voters sort of said no to roundabouts, and so we have some difficulties and a wide diversity of opinion.
So we have a number of questions coming in, and a whole bunch of hands just went up. And if you can send me the questions, maybe we can funnel them in a little bit better. Quick question on how has the wayfinding project in Katahdi been received? What's the vibe around that?
So Katahdi had this wayfinding signposting to give it a distinctive feel. I mean, all the other cities around us have. Petaluma has some nice ones, Muhlenberg has some nice ones, and I think everybody really likes that sense of just where the connections are. So it's along the Laguna. There's another phase of wayfinding that's coming in, which will be more informative signs, kiosks as well around the city. So I think it's been very well received. Everybody that I've talked to, maybe a few people have said, well, are those signs the wayfinding configurations, are they going to hold up for time, hold up over time? But fingers crossed, it was built right. So it's doing very well, I think. It's a very nice project to see roll out.
I noticed that there's been a couple of private conversations here in Petaluma about wayfinding and wouldn't it be nice if, and I recently ran across, oh, look, there are QR codes that I'd never seen before posted around downtown. I wonder if those are the things that we said we should do and haven't done, and are ignoring. So it's good to know that something's actually working. We do have, so I think I'm kind of out of questions at this point, although there's going to be some back and forth emails later on, but we have two hands up for, well, actually, before we go that, the wayfinding in Katahdi is human readable, right? Not QR codes?
Yes, it's definitely human readable. It's fitting in with some of the other signs that are on the creek. Is basically just to try and help people geolocate around and where all the different things. I mean, I actually went to a city some years ago that my mother went dancing in, was brought up in England, and what impressed me was there were signs all over to be able to, it was in Evesham, part of the Vale of Evesham in the middle of England, the heart of England, and it was just very impressive to see all these signs going in as a visitor, to be able to move around the parks and the old parts of the city. So it's coming along in Katahdi. It's still to be completed.
Okay. And I'm going to let Eris pop in with a quick question here, or a quick comment. And then I'd like to, I'm getting a request to see what David and Ken think about woonerfs. I can't say it. Eris, go for it.
Thanks. So Eris Weaver, I'm Executive Director of the Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition and Katahdi resident, and I was actually on our design review board working with that wayfinding project way back when. I've been very happy with that. My understanding in what I've seen about woonerfs is how they started in the Netherlands was more about taking a street that had been predominantly for cars and making it a more people-friendly space. And the photos that I've seen that, kids are playing in the street, they're riding their bikes. The cars have to kind of wait their turn and inch through slowly. And one of my concerns with how, Neil and I have been talking about this quite a bit, how some of the folks in Katahdi have sort of seized on this idea as this is a cool thing, let's put it somewhere, in a way that I think it sort of looks like more glorified parking lot.
I think we just lost.
He mentioned the. Oh, okay.
No, your audio came back, so lost you at glorified parking lot.
Oh, yeah, and they're kind of missing the point a little bit. They're sort of still seeing the asphalt part of it, the road part of it, and not getting the people part of it. And in fact, one of the staff had said something about not having it too long because we don't want drivers to be frustrated at having to slow down. And I was like, excuse me, that's the whole point of this sort of a structure, is to get the cars to slow down and let people use the street. So it's being an interesting dialogue in town.
So yes, it's great to hear Eris say that, and hopefully we're talking it around in the community and getting that discussion going. I hope it shouldn't be mandatory as part of a driveway, because that just seems to introduce more asphalt and make it more difficult.
Yeah, so we have a request for feedback from David and Ken on woonerfs. Woonerfs. Dave informs me in the background that it is woonerf, and I'm sure that I'm destroying the pronunciation even there. And Thomas, RCE/environmental, you have your hand up.
Hi, yes.
Okay, quick comment.
Yes, I thought those were very encouraging. I think that you will find developers who are interested in that, hopefully thinking in lines of like Eris, because when I grew up, we used to play in the street. That was about the only place there was. And we occupied the street. And if somebody was coming, then we got out of the way, but they slowed down because they saw us. occupying the street, and there's not always that kind of room that is suitable for play in a apartment area or something. I noticed that one drive that Neil was talking about was apparently 16 feet. And my experience is fire department wants minimum 28, or some places I've seen 25. That's who you really have to talk to about that. They demand, what they demand. But if you can make a savings there for the developer, then you have a trade-off there that you can ask them to do things for you, and they'll do it because they're benefiting.
I think that maybe one of the future things we need to line up is some people with experience from the fire department talking with us about minimum lane widths and what their requirements are.
If it's on site, 16 is a problem. That one would be kind of like you say, non-conforming. But if you can develop a scheme that they can appreciate for the on-site development that has this concept, the developer is going to appreciate that.
Oh yeah,
they'll do it.
Yep. Cool.
I think one of the things also maybe is to try and make sure that the comments from the fire department are public information as part of the project. So that, it can be clear if something's being driven a particular way, what the issues are. That was a comment recently that I've been trying to sort of just, let's be clear about what it is. And it's quite interesting. There is a new project. There's a project that's been built 10 years ago that has actually, for a back end for some apartment areas, actually has 10.5 feet, 11 feet. That was access. I was just looking at it recently and getting my tape measure out. So, I guess they could run their hoses back there was maybe the thinking.
Oh yeah, they're never driving back there.
Yeah.
No, I'm shocked at that, but so I'm really, my experience is in sort of more code driven cities rather than Katahdi or something like that. And but yeah, they would definitely benefit. But I mean, usually the conditions are somewhat public. They would be made public at a hearing. But certainly if there's something that is onerous, then the proponent is going to say, hey, can I, in a public hearing, they're going to say, can I get this relieved,
I think that, yeah, this is one where we need to directly engage, rather than speculating, directly engage the fire department on this. And I think I'll reach out. David, do you have any, since we have a request for your input on woonerfs, do you have any?
I'm not a woonerf expert. My wife is Dutch. We do go to Holland every year, so I'm pretty familiar with them. And they usually are, the ones I'm used to are in, like they're in residential districts. It seems a lot where there's apartments and townhomes. They're cool. The thing is, the Dutch, different driving laws there, totally different insurance requirements. And also, I think cars are restricted to the pace of maybe like 8 miles an hour, like you have there, or whatever the equivalent is, metric. But I love them. I think it's going to take a big lift working with fire and police and developers and everybody else.
Mm-hmm. So we have blazed on by our 8:30 number here. And I think we've kind of hit a reasonable spot in the discussion to carry on. I know that there are a couple of side chats that happened that will undoubtedly result in email threads later. So hit me up if you have additional things, and we will try to coordinate and make sure that we get additional concerns talked about in future KBYG meetings. Dave, do you have any additional words you want to add? I'm getting a shake there. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very, very much for our panelists for participating. We know that there are plenty of other things you could be doing with your evenings, and we're glad that you're talking to us. And yeah, with that, I will catch you all either Thursday the 18th at noon at Aquas or at our next get together, which will be right here at this very same Zoom link on December 8th at 7 p.m., where we will talk about affordable housing. Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, Dan, Dave.
Thank you.
Great
Thanks
presentations.
so much. Very good.